Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Durst. I've been hiring, firing, and mentoring executives, frontline employees, interns, and job seekers in companies around the world through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. I work with people in Hong Kong, India, Australia, and across the United States. What sets them apart? A lot, but there's more they have in common. And one of those commonalities is transition is a part of life. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions that are big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet, the people who can make the difference that matters to you right now. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big change. The insight track you're going to access during our future episodes is better than a crystal ball. It's the exact information you need to take that next step. Whether you're a new grad applying for your first professional job, someone looking to transition your work experience into a promotion, launching your own company, or maybe even starting to plan your retirement, you're in transition, and this series is for you. We all know transition can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have VIP access to the future you want. Are you tired of the uncertainty of being passed up? We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to the front of the line. So, if change is on your horizon, or maybe just the thought of change, you won't want to miss this discussion. It could be the exact edge you need to turn transition into an amazing opportunity. Gina Riley, I am so excited about having you on this episode. Ever since we started talking on LinkedIn, I knew that you were someone that I had to have on here. And so I'm pleased that we get the opportunity today.
I am so excited to be here.
Gina, when you were a young child, what was it that you wanted to be when you grew up?
When I was really young, I can't quite remember what I wanted to be, but I can tell you when the genesis started of where I got to today. So when I was in high school, I was exposed to some incredible motivational speakers that traveled all around the country in the mid 80s. And it was kind of during the era of say no to drugs and some of that kind of programming. And I was selected to go away on a 3-day leadership retreat with 150 other students from my school district. And the motivational speakers really sparked in me a desire to communicate better and to move around in the world with more confidence. And it inspired my entire career path going forward, everything from what I studied in college all the way through where I am today.
And how did that picture of yourself play out in the transitions that you experienced throughout your work life to where you're at today?
It's been rather fluid, Bob. When I first was in high school, I really took to the idea that communicating better led to better relationships, led to better understood in our lives. And so I chose a course of going to school to study communication, which was the study of interpersonal and organizational communication. And that led to an internship with a leadership coach who built his own communication program. I got to tag along with him to go to places like Motorola and listen to him train a whole room full of engineers on how to communicate better. And then it led to a whole career in human resources, one thing after the other, really leveraging the power of communicating effectively and listening deeply to understand people and make good matches through a recruiting process, hiring process. I also went and got my master's degree to further deepen my ability to work with leaders. And that led to another aspect of my career, which was in training and development.
Gina, before we start talking about transitions and the skills needed to shift between great job opportunities, I'd like to just talk for just a moment about a person's career. And you've certainly done a lot of thinking and speaking about career development. What do you think are the effective building blocks of a career for an individual?
Well, I think that if we're talking in the professional realm where people at least have an initial college degree, I think that there's educational requirements that we all go through that shows that we have a foundation of learning how to learn. So no matter what that degree is, can we stick it out and get through a degree program and then enter the workplace? I think that part of having an effective career is having layers of experiences and possibly trying out different functional areas to really round out your experiences, and then you become more valuable to any given employer. I also think another important component to a person's career is to be a continuous learner. That could look like a lot of different things. It might be an employer is willing to pay for part of advanced degrees. It might be additional certifications. It could be other kinds of programming that helps give you more insight into how to be more effective on the job, and also makes you more valuable and makes it easier for you to have fluidity when you want to make a career transition.
I love that line, layers of experiences, because that certainly lends itself to someone who potentially is in transition. It's not always bad, right? That I am moving from one job to another job.
Oh, no, not at all. With my recruiter's hat on, which I've been a recruiter and occasionally do some executive search, we want to see people sticking with a job for a little bit of time, but it's not unusual for professionals today to move at the 3-year mark and have that be okay. If you're moving around every 9 months, then you need to have some kind of a good story to back that up, because it could be a red flag for an employee.
Gina, you were out of work for a period of time. What did that time away from the work world do to help you understand better about the workplace? And then kind of a follow-up question, how did you bridge back into a more traditional role?
So I'll be putting on my stay-at-home parent hat. I spent about a decade out of the workplace. Actually, it was 15 years where I stepped away and was lucky enough to have a spouse that was able to support the whole family with that endeavor. And I was home raising 2 sons. So during that window of time, I was volunteering in my community, actively taking on projects that mattered to our school district. And then eventually, as the 15 years started to come to a head, it was the power of my relationships with my former colleagues at Intel that allowed me to have that segue back into the workplace, because, Bob, of the know, like, and trust factor. I'd already had 10 years at Intel. The relationships that I had built and the reputation that I had built allowed me an opportunity to re-enter the workplace and have people asking for me to come back to work.
Was it scary? I mean, emotionally, what did it feel like after being out for 15 years and then stepping back into decidedly a different role?
Well, that's a good question. I eased into it during those last couple of years before I really said, oh, I'm working. I was working consulting for my friend Sherry Kitsawan, who runs a talent agency called Talents Group. And so she would ask me to do smaller projects. Hey, will you please help me shore up our interview skills training that we're doing inside of all of these companies? So I would help her design some of that back end. I never ended up delivering the training during that window of time because I was busy with the kids at home. And then she asked me to help with an employer branding project. She's like, come and help me shore up my messaging and my brand. She was dribbling out these little projects, luring me back. And then before you knew it, it turned into, would you please do an executive search for me? That's when it got scary, because I hadn't been a recruiter for 15 years.
So when a person is coming back to the workplace, like you did, or it may be that they are pivoting between industries, public accounting to healthcare, let's say, or something of that nature. I have found that candidates have a difficult time talking about transferable skills. Can you talk just a little bit about what does transferable skills means and how does a candidate need to help paint that picture for the hiring manager?
I like how you asked that, Bob, with how do you paint the picture? It doesn't come down to specific words like good communication skills or team player, for example. And you're not going to get found for those words. A recruiter's not going to go into LinkedIn to search for someone like you and use generally what I would say are the soft skills, very important behavioral soft skills. They're going to put in hard skills that match the requirements of their job. So if, let's say, healthcare is a requirement, some kind of healthcare background, then that's going to be one of those key search terms they're going to put into the search engine. So if you're trying to make a pivot, you're going to have to network to get conversations and not expect just putting in an application is going to be enough. Now, to your question, though, you're asking about how do you communicate about your transferable skills? What are the importance of those? You need to take a really good look at the job descriptions and see what it is that they're asking the person to do. If this person comes in and does an exceptional job for that company, what are the skills that underpin getting the work done? And a lot of times it's farther beyond just functional expertise. It's influencing skills, collaboration, pulling in disparate voices. So it is on the candidate to get those stories ready so that they can paint the picture for the employer, so they can see how they fit. Will you be able to solve the problems they have? And are they willing to pay you to do it because you can convince them that you can do that job?
Gina, I've heard you say before that you've seen executives being uncomfortable with explaining their strengths that they have, or worse, they don't even know what they are. Can you explain what that means?
Sure. A lot of times I'm working with people who cannot quickly and adequately express their uniqueness. I sometimes refer to it as their awesome sauce. So when anyone gets into an interview situation, it's not just about talking about the tasks that you know how to perform. You also need to express how you do what you do. And so for anyone ranging from early professional all the way to a senior executive, it's important to know what the language is around that. I personally like using a tool called the UMAP Career Profile Assessment. And that assessment is 4 assessments in one, and it gives us the top 5 strengths from StrengthsFinder, your top values, your motivated and demotivated skills, and your personality. When you take that assessment, you have language to extract from it and actually use in interview situations where you can explain how you're going to show up on the job. That is very powerful. And the most powerful piece of that is with StrengthsFinder. With your top 5 strengths, you are 1 in 33 million with that combination of strengths out of all the people that Gallup has surveyed over the years and years.
Gina, I've heard in the recruiting process that perfectionism equals procrastination. What do you think that's talking about?
The thing about the career transition process, it's about trial and error and adjusting. And to not accept that one bit of information or piece of advice is the catalyst that's going to be the thing that moves the needle. It's going to be a lot of moving parts, and sometimes there's bad advice out there. So you may take some advice that doesn't serve you. Let's just talk about a resume. Perhaps one individual will say, hey, look at my resume and tell me what you think. Well, if you ask 10 people what they think of your resume, I promise you, you will get 10 different pieces of advice. You do what works for you and what is going to make you found by recruiters if you're using an applicant tracking system. And you need to use words and phrases that are powerful about your impact. So what I would say is there is no perfection at all in the career transition process. It's keeping things moving and to create a process and a plan. What I also say is when I'm working with leaders, they lead companies or organizations with strategic plans and KPIs and benchmarking, right? If they don't use that same sort of approach with their career transition process, that is a big miss. They need to treat their career like it's a personal project.
Gina, one of the things that I've noticed, people, when they had a job, people wanted to be on their calendar. When they're between jobs, those leaders are trying to get people to come onto their calendar. And they kind of lose sight because they don't have that structure of the workday, the work week. How do you coach your clients to help provide some of that structure?
That's a great question. And I have not gotten to that nitty gritty with the leaders and the execs that I've coached. Where I have had at least one person kind of go off the rails is when they don't follow any plan whatsoever. So I'm providing a lot of frameworks and structure, and then they were using me as sort of their checklist. They would get on the call each week, and then I would go through the checklist and like, yeah, I didn't do any of that because I got distracted. Well, that's another problem, that individual needed some different type of professional help. Most leaders that I work with absolutely understand the frameworks and structure that I'm providing, and they are able to at least time block, right, to get all of those things in their day. But I don't recommend that people spend 40 solid hours. If you're out of a job, I don't recommend you spend 40 hours a week constantly grinding things out. There's strategic and deliberate ways to go through this process and then still free yourself up to take care of your own mental health and your physical health.
What might a future-ready mindset mean in the job search process?
A future-ready mindset is really about being in that tiny percentile of people who are ready at any given time to accept a phone call from a prospective hiring manager or recruiter. Recently, I just read that it's a small microcosm of people around the world who are ready at any given time. Most people have their heads down. They're grinding out their day-to-day job. And then when something happens, maybe it's not their fault. Maybe there's a reduction in workforce, there's an acquisition, and there's duplicate management. We don't know. But sometimes people find themselves without a job, and then they're shocked to realize, oh, I haven't been activating my network. I haven't been keeping in touch with people. There's things that you can do bit by bit, month by month, to ensure that you have a healthy network and that you're showcasing your thought leadership so that people really see you as an expert and a go-to person. And so you're a desirable candidate in the future.
Gina, what does practicing patience in the job search mean to you?
I think it goes back to the idea that you're constantly going to be learning and getting feedback and adjusting. So I think that's part of the patience process. A lot of people just really want a formula and then they want to just follow that and have a specific outcome. The reality is we're all humans and we're dealing with humans trying to get these jobs. So there isn't a one size fit all approach or message or anything. I mean, you may catch somebody on one day and they behave one way, and then on another day, it's a completely different thing. So I would say you have to have patience with yourself, and you certainly have to have patience with others, because a lot of the times you're dealing with really busy people who drop the ball, who ghost, who frankly aren't very kind. So you have to really realize that it's humans that are kind of going through this process together, and it's messy and it's not perfect.
Many recruiters have told me before that you should really focus in on a target list of companies as opposed to sending out resumes indiscriminately. But then I have candidates that say, but don't you miss out on an entire sea of companies that you might be interested in and would be very happy to be a part of? How do you balance that?
It's an excellent question. And the balance is you want to spend maybe 10, maybe 15, 20% of your time applying. If you're going to bother to apply, you need to immediately be looking for, and I'm using air quotes, Bob, decision makers, whether that's the talent acquisition team, the recruiting team, potential hiring manager. You do not want to do the spray and pray approach, which is I'm going to apply, click apply now, and then I sit back and I fold my hands and I pray someone's going to call me. You don't know how many people are applying for that job. You don't know if there's internal candidates. It could be a few people are applying, could be 800 people. One time I ran a search, I had 800 resumes to review. So a very small percentage is looking at the landscape and selectively applying to things that fit. And if you're applying to things that aren't a great fit and you're not a good skill match, it could be a waste of your time. That's when you have to network. You really do. The rest of the time, let's say 80%, is going to be targeted reach outs. You need to build your list of companies that you're interested in, use a rating criteria, and then take it 5 companies at a time. And I know at the end of our discussion here, I'll be sharing a few books that I recommend. I highly recommend Steve Dalton's The 2-Hour Job Search, second edition. And he has in there exact formulas on how to create your company list. That's the 2-hour piece. It actually takes 45 minutes to build a target list, according to Dalton. And then the remaining time that you're spending is coming up with your criteria. And then he gives you all the language for your reach out. It's awesome. All of my clients buy that book, and we all subscribe to using that method.
Gina, I saw a job listing not too long ago, and it had 18 requirements for the position. That may be a bit much. Whatever the number of requirements for a position might be, as a candidate, do I have to have all of them, or can I have some of them and still apply?
I would say that if you're meeting those first couple of requirements, that's going to be a closer match. Also pay attention to whether or not they say nice to have versus required. And you also have to think like the recruiters. Let's say there are 200 people that apply for a job, and a recruiter is going to go in and like use a few key search terms to populate a search from that little pool of people to make it smaller, to figure out who to reach out to. You have to have those keywords on your resume. So let's say an MBA is required and they're going to use that as a search term, then they're going to put in MBA, for example. Or let's say it's a finance role and a CPA is required. So if you're missing a CPA and they're requiring it, then again, you're probably going to have to network and get a conversation so you can explain how you have the skills without the certification or education.
What do you think is the ideal amount of time that a candidate should be researching a company that they're interested in? And are there tips and techniques that you coach your clients in terms of how to do that research?
I love doing research. I think it's a lot of fun. I know it can be tiring if you're actually in the job search, and it can cause you to waste time and go down rabbit holes. This is why, again, I'm going to refer to the 2-hour job search, where you're actually coming up with your target list without doing homework initially. And he gives the psychology behind why you don't want to do that too, which I just really love. He's telling you why you don't spend time going down the rabbit hole. Now, beyond that, when I'm working with executives, most of them know how to do the homework, but they may just need some encouragement and coaching and guidance. So you're looking at annual reports, you're looking, investor reports, you're Googling to see if anything is in the news from the past couple of months or year. Look at the key players. Are they quoted in any articles, for example? You're doing LinkedIn searches and researching the background of some of the people that you may interact with. So there's many ways to do that searching, and it's especially critical for my candidates who end up in finalist rounds and maybe even doing a finalist presentation to really get their arms around the strategy and understanding the strategic plan, who's investing in the company, all those nitty-gritty details that show that you have your arms around where the business is heading.
Gina, how do you coach your clients in preparation for their interviews?
Well, I subscribe to the SOAR methodology, first of all, and I know there's different constructs to use. There's PAR, CAR, and so on. I use SOAR, which stands for what was the situation that you were in? What were the obstacles or challenges? What actions did you take? And if it's a leader, I want to hear also, what did your team do? That way you can balance out the I versus the we, showing humility, but owning what you led. And then the fourth part of SOAR is results. What results did you get? Can you quantify it? Did something increase or decrease? So we use that construct and we match that up to each bullet point on the job description. And I create behavioral or competency questions related to each of those line items. And so you can easily do this for yourself. Tell me about a time when you led the strategic direction for a consumer products organization. What was the strategy? Who was involved? That kind of thing. And then my clients will go build their stories and tell them back to me so we can shape, refine them, because you want those stories to be crisp You want to be able to tell them quickly because you want to be able to communicate as many skills and competencies in the time you have as possible.
Gina, how do you talk about a bad work experience that you may have had in the past? What's the way that you frame that to put that in the best light for yourself?
That's a great question. It's really on a case-by-case basis. So, for example, I had a senior executive let go from their position. The financial position of the company wasn't up to where the board was expecting. And so there was a parting of ways. And then there was a gap of employment while the person was making their next career move. So in that case, we had to approach that with honesty. There was 30 years of excellence before that one job, but then there was a sense of loss. There was a sense of embarrassment about that part of the storytelling. And so we shaped it into a very short narrative that told the truth, but it addressed the reality of what happened and then helped move that person into the next part of the conversation. So addressing things head on, but I wouldn't go down rabbit holes or badmouth people. I wouldn't say, oh, my supervisor was horrible. I would try to figure out what the right blend is to share. So let's say it's a toxic culture. You don't want to be bad mouthing all the people you worked with. You'll just say, the environment didn't really match my values. And what I'm seeking now is an organization that has X, Y, and Z for me so I can thrive.
That kind of lends itself to what I was thinking on the next question, which is, can you ever talk too much in an interview?
Yes, absolutely. The biggest pitfall that anyone can run into, and I've seen it with even CEO candidates doing executive search, is rambling. It is absolutely the worst thing that you can do in an interview. And the challenge with that is you're not always faced with an interviewer who is experienced enough or is able to guide you in a different direction. It takes a strong recruiter or hiring manager to be able to do that and say, hey, look, thank you for your story. I'm really heading in this other direction. I need to uncover this skill from you, right? And as soon as I start doing something like that with a senior leader, they usually course correct pretty sharply. For those who cannot course correct, it shows me that they may have an issue with their EQ. They're not reading the room. They don't have executive presence, and they can't course correct in a way that matches the situation that we're in with a limited time in an interview.
Let's talk about, you've mentioned one book already, The 2-Hour Job Search, second edition. Any other books or resources that you would recommend?
Oh, absolutely. I mentioned the UMAP Career Profile Assessment. You can find that too on Amazon. It's called UMAP, Find Yourself, Blaze Your Path, Show the World. And that's by Kristen Cherry. So that's highly recommended. You can also do her certification. You can find that online at myumap.com. The other book I recommend, and I actually give this to all my clients when they sign up for my program, is Pay Up by Kate Dixon, Kate Dixon, Dixon. And Kate is a compensation expert guru, and she wrote an easy to read, funny book on how to prepare to do salary negotiation. And so I call that having a comp expert in my back pocket, and I send it to all my clients when they sign up with me.
Gina, if our listeners remember only 3 things as they leave this podcast today, what are the 3 things that you want them to remember?
I would start with you own your own career and you own your career planning process. And you're the one that needs to look out for number 1. When it comes to your career, you can't expect to be plucked out of obscurity and have your work only speak for itself. You have to really own and manage your reputation. That would be 1. I would say it's really important to stay on top of one's thought leadership too. We kind of touched on that just a little bit, but I would say it's important to consistently showcase what you do, whether that's writing articles or engaging with other professionals on LinkedIn in a professional way, or maybe it's ponying up for speaking engagements. There's small and big ways to showcase your thought leadership. Could be taking on projects at work where you get cross-functional visibility. So doing things to elevate your career that way. The third thing I would say is unpack your awesome sauce. Get to understand what makes you unique, because that will give you the confidence to clearly articulate how you do what you do. And that's the element that underpins those questions you answer in interviews.
Gina Riley, I love your awesome sauce, and I'm so glad that we had the chance to hear from you today and learn some of the tips and techniques to effectively make career transitions. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. We're working in unprecedented times as the world responds to the recent COVID-19 crisis. The fact is that even those who are not in transition understand it could be right around the corner, next month, or a year from now. The purpose of these episodes are to give listeners support and the critical tools to adjust with the winds, wherever they come. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully, perhaps gracefully, or without too many battle scars, survived their own obstacle courses, and can share useful information on how to steady your ship or your world in this uncertainty. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on social media. If you have any questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I appreciate your time you're investing in sharing these important conversations with me, my guests, and others who are going through life transition. Transitions between jobs, life stages, new entrepreneurial ventures, or whatever life brings. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode of People in Transition.